Welcome back, everybody. Thank you so much for making it. We've got a great afternoon with your employers panel. I'm going to introduce each of them and then let them explain a little bit more about what they do. So we have Jim Foulger from Bauer. We have Pav from We Are the Allies, founder and managing director there. And we have Jonny Buchan from BBC Leeds. So if you can just tell us a bit more in detail about what those jobs entail on a day-to-day basis.
Want me to go first? So, yes, Jim Foulger from Bauer Media. So we have radio stations across the whole of the UK and across the whole of Europe, actually. My main remit is across England and Wales. We have massive national stations such as Magic or KISS or Absolute Radio, Kerrang, Planet Rock, all of these. And we also have our local networks, Hits Radio Network and the Greatest Hits Radio Network, which is the home to Simon Mayo nowadays. It came from the BBC to us. So what my job entails is we have 150 journalists across the whole of the UK, and on a daily basis, we're mobilising all of those reporters out to the biggest stories across the UK. So we're essentially looking at one team there. What are the stories? What are the team we've got? Who can we get where? Let's cover those stories. And then that's coming through onto our news bulletins, which happen every hour on the hour. And then there's various other bits where we bring it all together and put it online in, huge big podcasts or whatever that we're doing there. But that's it in a nutshell.
Great. Pav?
So I run We Are the Allies. So we are a network of, over 500 freelancers now. So essentially, we cover every creative discipline. So if you think makeup artists, PR specialists, art directors, copywriters, film directors, we've pretty much got them all. So the model really for us was born out of, freelancers being part of a family and feeling like rather than, when you work for a big organisation, you've got a big team, haven't you? Often when you're a creative and you go freelance, you're on your own. So we wanted to create that family. So what we do is advertising agencies or Channel 4, for example, come to us with a brief. We then take that brief, we look at that brief. So that brief might be, actually, we need a particular type of motion graphics work, a piece of work doing, or, we need some copy, but it's got to be long form copy. We then look at that brief and essentially look at all of our freelancers and go, who's going to be the right person to deliver that brief for the agency or the client? We then send them recommended allies. We've got portfolios built at the back of our site for all of the freelancers. And essentially we send them the portfolio plus their day rate. The agency and the client sign that off, and then off they go. They complete that piece of work. But the big thing for freelancers is we pay them all in 14 working days. So actually, from a cash flow point of view, it means that they get paid on time, which is a massive thing. It really, really is. But it benefits agencies because you can't often have every creative discipline covered within your team. So if there's gaps in experience, we can plug that gap.
And Jonny?
I'm Jonny Buchan. I'm in charge of the sports team at BBC Radio Leeds, one of 39 sports teams in the country across local radio. And we pretty much cover anything if it's got sport involved in West Yorkshire. So whether that's Leeds United, whether it's the rugby league, cricket, football. In August, we had 221 hours worth of live sports output across online and on radio as well. So I have a team of journalists, reporters and producers who go out and cover anything and everything that might be happening on a day-to-day basis or a week-to-week basis. So press conferences, any of the big stories that might occur from those. We do podcasting as well, lots of digital work, lots of social media, a little bit of everything. So if it's got sport in it and it's based in West Yorkshire, then we'll be not far off.
Thanks very much. Obviously, this is called Getting Your Foot in the Door, this panel. And so I just want to start off by sort of talking about how people can do that. Often, from even personal experience, I've found when I was a student, it could be a bit of a chicken and the egg situation. You want to get the placement, the work experience to get the experience, but you can't get that sometimes without having the experience. How can our students kind of go about that at this point? Jim, we'll come to you.
So how do you go about getting work experience, I suppose, is the first instance. Well, it's the whole thing of asking, but you need to then demonstrate the value that you'll bring to people as well, because looking at it from our point of view, and I'll look at it from my point of view, I'm sure you'll have other things that you can bring in here, is that actually we get loads of applications for work placement. We get loads. So what's going to mean that you're able to stand out? We're also incredibly busy doing our day jobs, so it can't be chapter and verse. It can't be huge. The detail shouldn't be right down the bottom that you want to impress with. So go in there with something that can demonstrate the value that you might want to bring, but also the passion that you have for being part of the industry, that we love already, right? Because that passion comes across really loudly when people do it right. So first instance is be in touch, and I'll defer to my colleagues here, but I'd just say as well, be tenacious, because it may not be that you get a response straight away, but you will get a response. But be polite and tenacious, and you'll get there.
And Pav, I suppose it's slightly different for you, because I suppose you probably expect people to already have the experience at the point at which they might be coming to you as a freelancer.
Yeah, absolutely. I think portfolios are a massive thing for us. So, often even really experienced freelancers won't have a website and they won't have an Instagram page. If you are good at what you do and you have work to show, I would say start putting that into a portfolio so that actually you're collecting it as you go along, rather than have that moment when somebody goes, have you got one? And you're like, what did I do 2 years ago? So make sure you've got a really strong portfolio. Now, one of the things that we've introduced, given that we understand it's really difficult for students to get work experience, is the Allies Academy. So what the Academy is essentially we will take graduate students that are tenacious and that are absolutely ambitious and have a talent, and essentially we will interview them. And if we think that they have a real raw talent, we bring them on board, we train them how to be a freelancer, and then we will basically get them some experience in and amongst agencies, just so that they can try different things. So for example, you might go in as an editor and think, actually no, I'm not an editor, I'm more of a colorist. So you can try different things before you take that full-time role. But there are schemes out there, and there's lots of things that you can do to, I guess, get experience before that work experience comes along, is what I would say. So portfolio is key for me.
And what about the BBC, Jonny? Because I know sometimes it's not quite as simple as knocking on the door with those. There are kind of more official channels sometimes you have to go through.
Yeah, there's a mix of both. So there are the official channels. So from a sports perspective, there's something called the kick-off scheme. So if you want to be a sports reporter, you can apply to take part in the kick-off scheme. Really, really competitive. But if you do go for that, then there are a lot of opportunities. It might be that you have to travel to a different location to be able to be a part of that. But some really good journalists have come through that I've worked with over the last few years and have gone on to work for the likes of MotoGP, traveling the world, match of the day, going to games here, there and everywhere. You can really have a good career if you come in through that entry portal. There's also the work experience portal, the BBC's work experience portal, which you just need to Google. You can go through it there, but you can still bypass it by emailing the right people as well if you find their names and you find their email addresses. And as Jim says, it can be very busy at times. You do get a lot of emails coming through and you might not necessarily get back to them straight away. But my first paid gig came through sending an email, no one got back to me. A friend a few weeks later nudging me and saying, no harm done, send them another email. And I did. And it ended up resulting in my first paid gig when I was in the seats that you guys are all in right now. So you do have to be a little bit persistent, because people will have the best intentions to get back to you, and then something will come along and they have to just focus on that, and then your email drops down the inbox. So if you sent an email and not had a reply, leave it a couple of weeks and send that email again, I'd say.
I feel like that's an official invite for them to get your email address at the end of today and send things over to you. And Pav, you touched on it there, social media, using that as sort of a portfolio. We've talked about it earlier today, we've talked about it in lectures, the fact that, sometimes social media can be a blessing and a curse. We've spoken to students about ensuring that their social media profiles are professional. Can you just reiterate, how much do you check up on people? How important is it to keep that content professional? Would it put you off offering someone work, depending on what you saw on there?
I think have different profiles. So for example, we have, so a lot of our freelancers have a professional profile and then they have a personal profile. That way you can keep the two very separate. So that's how I would recommend that you approach that, definitely.
My rule of thumb is I would never put anything on social media that I wouldn't say live on the radio. And that seems to have seen me okay. And so far. But I will always look at people's social media channels, not necessarily going to their private Facebooks and those kinds of things, but absolutely any public facing one like Twitter, Instagram. If it is accessible for me, it's accessible for one of our listeners. And if one of our listeners then comes and has a look and is offended by some of the things you're putting on social media, well, what that does is it brings the organisation you're working for into disrepute. And that would be a serious problem. So yeah, I would say try and keep your social media channels as not necessarily professional. You can still put your personality on there, but make sure you're keeping them safe. I wouldn't be doing certain things on social media that you might be doing with your mates, sat around having a few beers. You might want to just keep that one left out.
And Jim, looking at, people's experience, their CVs, is all experience good experience, would you say?
Yes, 100%. 100%. Try and get that experience wherever you can. And there are lots of ways to do that nowadays, aren't there? And everything is... there's a lot of ways to be able to demonstrate transferable skills that are really useful in the world of a reporter, of a radio reporter in my world, right? But also that nowadays we're looking for those multimedia skills too. So, you know, if you are skilled in being able to shoot video, if you are skilled in terms of being able to speak to people and you can demonstrate that you've gone out there and that you've met some people and you've done a few things that you can do off your own back, well, that's really important for us to hear about. And nowadays it's much more easy to do that than it was when I was starting, when you'd actually just have to write something down and do all those kind of things as well. You know, you've got everybody in this room, I would imagine, will have something in their pocket that means that they can actually do what a reporter does on a day-to-day basis. So sort of demonstrate those skills, build it up, have a portfolio. Yeah.
And just following up on that, Jonny, in terms of if a graduate was coming to you looking for a job, what skills and experiences at that point would you expect them to have? What would you expect them to be leaving university with?
As much experience as you can have. If you're coming to me at the end of third year and you haven't gone out and got any experience off your own back, that rings alarm bells for me, because it makes me ask, do you actually really want to do it? Is it something that you're really committed to doing? You know, I was at university and I was doing work experience at the Yorkshire Evening Post, ITV. I was doing non-league commentaries on a Sunday morning in someone's house. I kid you not, it was one of those things that you just did to get the experience of doing it. If you come into the end of your university time and you don't have that experience behind you, get it now, because we will look at that. We will look at where you've been and what desire you've shown to actually want to go and do the job.
And for you,
yeah,
Pav, exactly, what are employers looking for?
Absolutely agree. I mean, when I studied in London, I did marketing, press and PR, and I went out to She Magazine and lots of different publications and got that work experience. And actually, when I moved back to Leeds to get my first job, the fact that I'd worked in these London publishing houses and I'd not only done that, but, you know, finished my course, it really did help me get that first job. So they were looking for that. We certainly do, in terms of, like I said, on the graduate training program that we're putting in place. You know, we will be looking at what are the other skills that you have gone out and what have you learned, what have you done for yourself type thing, and how self-motivated are you?
It's a small industry as well. So if you've done work somewhere, just from my example, if you've done work for a football club somewhere, I will likely know somebody who knows somebody at that football club. So the first thing I would do is get in touch with them and say, what's this person like? And if you get a good glowing reference, then yeah, absolutely in the door you come. And if they say, no, nightmare, stay away, then it's a different story. So always be aware that it's a small industry and everybody knows everybody in some way, shape or form.
It's worth mentioning, I mean, I don't think anybody in this room would do this, but be truthful, right? Always be truthful. I had somebody, because we've got a big network of stations, I had somebody who worked for one of our stations in the Northwest. No, they didn't. They came in on work placement. Then they applied to me. I gave them the work placement in the Northwest. Then applied to me in London and said that they'd had a paid gig for 2 years in that job. So, listen, the work experience would have been worthwhile than flagging there. They didn't need to necessarily lie to say I've had a job for 2 years here and then tell me that because I knew it. Be careful, it's a small industry, isn't it?
Very small.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
And that obviously made them stand out for the wrong reason. You mentioned earlier when applying, sending emails, that kind of thing, standing out. How can you stand out when you're on a work placement? Things that might, to us be obvious, but small things that people might not think about. How can you really make an impression?
It's your shop window. It's the opportunity to be able to show what you can do in the full glare of people who could potentially employ you right away, off the back of it even. So hit the ground running, certainly listen to the radio station if you're in my case, before you turn up that day. Again, in my case, know the news agenda. If you're working in a region, know the news agenda in that region, have listened to the station, have a couple of ideas, not rocket science, have a couple of ideas about how you might be able to go in that day and help the news desk out, because the news desk is looking to generate content based on the day's news agenda in that area. Put that together with a few ideas from yourself. Come in there and pitch a couple of ideas. It may be a no, but that will be a big tick right as soon as you walk in through that door. That's the first thing I'd do.
So being proactive.
100%.
Pav?
That's exactly what I would say. Be super proactive and go talk to people, get to know people. Those communication skills are so important. And actually, if you're helping, it's very often when you're in a very busy environment, you need support, you need help, even if it is just, can you just go and do a lunch run or whatever it might be, just ask, say, is there anything I can do to help? And ask before you leave as well. I think that's massive before you walk out the door, when somebody says, is there anything else I can do to help before I leave? wow, for me, that's a big tick.
Yeah, read the room, know when people are really busy as well. There will be times when you might feel like you're just sat there not really doing anything and everyone else is really busy. Offer to help, and if you get a, no, I'm too busy at the minute, or there isn't anything you can do at the moment, then as you say, offer to make a brew. Just go and learn how to make a good cup of tea. That would always help as well. Well, no, good point. Good cup of coffee then. But just know when people are really busy, there will be times when everyone has their heads down and they're busy and they're working on things, and you saying, can I do this, can I do that, can I do this, can I do the other? It could actually have a detrimental impact, so just know when is the right time to ask for help on things and when to offer yourself, because sometimes it can be, work experiences for people employing as well can be as stressful as it can be for you guys who are coming in and sitting there. So just try and read the room a little bit, I'd say. Yeah.
And how have things changed over the years? Obviously, Jim, I know with Bauer, there's been a lot of remote working, that kind of thing. Our interviews this morning were virtual. How has that sort of changed the landscape of placements and accessibility to that kind of thing?
We had to stop all of our placements in COVID, just like everybody else did, right? And it was one of those kind of things where the placements are really important to what we would call our grassroots. So finding out who the great new talent coming into the industry is. So it was a real issue, frankly. But we were too busy reacting, we were too busy working out how we could work out from it, so it had to stop. And of course the contact side of it was important to take into account. We pretty quickly came up with an idea that we could offer mentoring to people, which was really successful. So in 2020 we just offered it, sort of put our toe in the water. We offered it to 3 people who were doing journalism courses. And then last year we expanded that because of the success to offer it to 17 people, and we're looking to grow it more and more. So out of that experience of COVID, having sort of really shut down on work experience opportunities for a short period of time, we were able to grow a new stream of being able to offer opportunities to people who are the most tenacious, the most interested, the most excited about coming into the industry. So there was a really good opportunity came out of a difficult circumstance, I suppose.
And Pav, with your business, that must have changed things as well, because you've got freelancers and clients who maybe aren't based anywhere near each other, but it allows that connection for them as well.
Freelance was a funny one, actually, because, I think what COVID enabled freelancers to do, whereas before they had to go into a work environment to deliver a brief, for example, what COVID forced agencies to get used to was actually it doesn't matter if an art director sat in London and the agency's in Leeds, that work can still happen. Nothing has to stop. So what it's done is it's opened up a whole world of freelancers and agencies to be able to work with each other no matter where they're located. I think the work experience side of it definitely suffered, because certainly that's why we started the academy during COVID, when we were talking to unis, and it was so difficult, for them to get that experience. So we took 10 students, and again, it was all very remote, but we introduced them to agencies and they got some experience. 2 got a gig at Netflix and then went off and got a job in London. So actually, it didn't stop, but it changed things for freelance. But I think with the student side of things, it was a case of they could still do it, but we just had to approach it slightly differently.
And Jonny, how's it impacted on the BBC and yourself and your team in terms of the way that you work and interviews and maybe not being done as person as much? Are you trying to get back to fully doing them in person, or actually doing virtually? Is that working for you? Yeah,
there's positives and negatives to it. So there are times when it is, if you can jump on a Zoom, it is far more easier on your working day time-wise, and still of the same quality of audio if you get it set up right. And it saves you having to travel along the M62 for an hour or an hour and a half at that time of day on a morning, as it might well be. So there are positives to it. It's always better though to look someone in the eye and sit down face to face with them and have that conversation with them face to face, I find, on an interview basis, and also just on a basis like this. It's far better to be able to sit and have that conversation. It impacted us hugely during COVID. My bank of desks, I've got a team of between 6 and 10 every day. We were only legally allowed 2. We weren't allowed 2 people in a studio, so therefore I couldn't teach anybody how to learn the techniques. We use a lot of freelance casual staff who are just out of university, 4 or 5 of them every single match day. Well, I couldn't bring any new people into that pool because I couldn't legally sit in a studio with them, or not legally, but in the BBC guidelines, and show them how to do it because we weren't allowed in the same room together. So it did have a delayed impact for a couple of years of us bringing in that next group of people that you bring forwards and then get them on air and then move them onto their main job and their full-time job, wherever that might be. It's definitely had a delayed impact, yeah.
We've talked a bit about how it can be difficult just to secure a placement. How resilient do our students need to be in terms of knocking on those doors? And if things don't go well, or if they get a no, or if they pitch a story that maybe the editor says, it's not quite right, how can they go about keeping their confidence up and almost learning to hear the word no sometimes? Because it does happen in the industry a lot, doesn't it?
It does. So I mean, for me, I guess it's that persistence. It really is. I think, like you said, just send that follow-up email, keep going. I remember being at Morrison's when I looked after the TV there, and there was a young guy called Jacob, and he just kept emailing. And in the end, it was like, right, come in for a coffee, because he got me on a day when actually I had a bit of headspace, and he came in and we had a chat, and he was just amazing and ended up getting the role, and was with me for 3 years. So I think it is that, just keep going and just stay positive, because like you said before, people are busy and they might not just have the time. Doesn't mean that's anything to do with what you've sent them or the email. It's not about that. They're just busy.
Yeah, it's hard, right? It's anxiety inducing at times.
Yeah.
We've all sat in similar seats to you where you're thinking, can I get a job off the back of this course that I've paid all this money for? That's anxiety inducing. It's natural. It's natural to feel a little bit concerned and nervous and worried and anxious about it. And it's absolutely, particularly more so these days than when I was coming through university, more open to talk about that with your friends and with your tutors and all those sorts of things. So don't worry if that's how you feel about it. That's absolutely fine. But just know that everyone's probably going through something similar. So you've got the resilience built in you. Your lecturers are putting that resilience into you. We're sitting here trying to explain to you that we're not evil, bad people that are just ignoring your emails and going, they're rubbish. We're literally just busy if we don't get back to your email. So just get in touch with us again. And you'll find most people in the industry are actually all right people. There's a few rogue ones, but most people are all right. So you'll be okay. Just send the email, have the conversations. You'll be absolutely fine. But know that if you are feeling a little bit concerned and anxious and worried about it, that's normal. That's natural.
And the resilience that you're having to show in that circumstance as well will stand you well for being able to do the job too, because you don't get the interview you want the first time sometimes. You need to keep asking. You find new ways to ask. You need to show that tenacity that we talked about earlier, don't we? So we're able to actually get the best possible results at the end of the day. The things that you get really easily in journalism are the things that everybody can get and aren't necessarily worth getting, some might argue. So actually it's about building up those skills of resilience so you can reach further, so you can do better, get a better job.
How much support is available? I mean, I know from working at Bauer, there is support for the staff there when you're having to report on difficult issues and that kind of thing, and everyone struggled over the last few years. How much is in place within the industry, do you think, in terms of supporting young journalists?
The BBC has a full support system and network involved that you can get in touch with. If you do end up getting in the door at the BBC, all you need to do is speak to the person that's looking after you, your line manager, whoever that might be, and they have a full series of counsellors and all those sorts of things that are able to help you through things. And that isn't just for people like you coming in, that's for people like me as well. If you're having a difficult managerial situation, there's a managerial support network that you can go to and ask for people who might have been in those situations before to guide you through. I've only been a manager of a team as big as I have for 4 years or so now. So when I first came into it, and then obviously had a full COVID situation to deal with, I had to lean on the experience of other people because I hadn't been there before. I was the youngest sports editor in the country. I just hadn't done it. So to be able to lean on other people is key. And it goes for all you guys, leaning on each other's experiences that you might have had as well. And anyone who might have graduated and is coming back to talk to you in these coming weeks, speak to them because they will have been in the exact situation many of you find yourselves in.
Thinking back to when you were all, sat on the other side of this, what was your most memorable experience on a placement or on work experience or an internship? Is there anything that particularly stands out?
Jim?
This is probably quite a bizarre one. Very few people will get this experience, right? I did the course here 25 years ago, and it was, and then I went to what was Radio Air because it was the local station, wasn't it? As the for work experience, and it was one of those situations where there wasn't much going on that week, and it was exactly what we're talking about, where you have to keep kind of saying, is there anything I can do? I'll go and make you a brew then. It's that kind of thing. And just like by the Thursday, I think a press release had come through from Leeds Bradford Airport to say, does anybody want to go up and see the Northern Lights? out of a plane. And everybody else in the newsroom was busy. So I said, yeah, I'll go and do that. You had to go there at midnight, and then you had to get flown out there. You fly right up by the, wherever the islands are, north of Scotland, all of that. And then I came back next day, and then sort of really just off my own back, just made a big package out of it, a big radio piece out of it, and then just showed them it. So it was one of those kind of things where I had to work from midnight to 5 a.m. But I just thought, well, why not? Quite like to say I've done that. But also, what an experience.
And what was the reaction?
Well, they liked the package, right? I mean, it was too long. The quality wasn't good enough, it was all those kind of things. But nevertheless, it was just an opportunity to kind of go, do you know what, I'll grab that.
Yeah. It was the initiative that you showed in that situation.
Yeah.
I've got two working for Real Radio that used to be a commercial station around here that no longer exists, which you could say about many commercial radio stations now around here. But I had two. One of them was, who Richard Hammond is? Off of with Jeremy Clarkson and all that. He had his big crash. He was doing a test of a rocket-powered car in York, and he crashed at 200 odd miles an hour. And this was the story of the day. And I was one of the only reporters in, and I was at that time on work experience. And I got told, go down to the LGI, that's where he's been helicoptered into, and stand outside and wait for Jeremy Clarkson to come and do a statement. So I did exactly that, went down there, the assembled media was there was a real buzz around, and we stood there for 12 hours, and we saw Jeremy Clarkson drive in, and 12 hours later, drive out, and got absolutely nothing from that day at all, apart from a vox of some people saying they didn't really know who Richard Hammond was. So it was an absolutely worthless day, but ultimately, I went and did it. And then a day later, off the back of that, they said to me, because you went and stood there all day, do you want to come to the Leeds United press conference with us? I said, yeah, brilliant, I'll come to the Leeds United press conference. And at this time, someone called Kevin Blackwell was in charge of Leeds United. And I got up there, and at this point, I was still a university student. I had fairly longish hair. And I walked in, and all he did in front of everybody else in the room was take the mick out of my hair, which put me on the back foot for that one as well. So it was a difficult couple of days. But again, resilience. You get through that, and then you move on and go on to the next thing.
Brilliant.
Pavan, I feel like they've set the bar pretty high with those two.
I think for me, it was like sort of She magazine was amazing because I'd got the placement, and to have that sort of beauty editor, and you get taken to these product launches and all that all of it just made me go, oh wow, this is amazing, and I want to do this one day. And I think that's the other thing, pick placements that really interest you as well. I think that's really important, because ultimately you want to get experience, you don't just want to take anything. So I think also, as much as you can't, you might say, well, I'll just take whatever I can get. Think about what it is that you want to do. I think is really important.
Just got a couple of minutes before we open it out to the floor. Last thing I want to ask you each, what was the best piece of advice either you were given or that you would now give?
I would say, Jim's kind of touched on it, if you want to work in the media industry, whether that be radio, TV, whether it's magazines, whatever it might be, listen, watch or read. Whichever one of those you want to go into. I'm in radio, but obviously now it's a lot more multimedia. Read things, listen to things, watch things, work out what you think's good and why you think it's good. Work out what you don't like and why you don't like it. You won't all agree. I have my favourite radio presenters, I have my favourite commentators. You've got one of them in later today in John Murray. But other people won't necessarily think he's one of the best. They might like somebody else. That's fine. That's what it's about. That's what this industry is about, opinions. And you don't have to try and be the next John Murray. You can try and be the next yourself if you're a commentator or whatever it might be. But you're only going to get there is if you listen to everything else around you and work out what is good, why it's good. It spoils it for you as well. I can't listen to a radio commentary without analysing it as I'm listening to it. I can't listen to a news bulletin, as I'm sure you're the same, without analysing it and going, why did they go with that story? Why didn't they play that clip there? It ruins it for you, but ultimately you will understand it a lot better, and I think that gives you much more of a chance of succeeding in the industry if you understand the industry better. Yeah.
I would agree. Like for us, it's like, God, I can't watch, the ad break without analysing the TV adverts, I can't wait for all the Christmas ones to be out so I can analyse them. But for me, I think the advice that I was given was to have a bit of a plan. Obviously that plan can change, but actually have a bit of a plan. So for example, for me, mine was I wanted to start out in an agency environment, which I did, but then I thought actually I would always want to go on and work client side, because imagine if I can take that agency experience and take it client side, God, it's going to be great for them learn, but what else am I going to learn? But then from there it was, one day I will have my own business and I would love to do that, right? And so there was always a plan, and I went a little bit like that sometimes, but there was always a plan and that's great to have that, because it kind of, when you're then thinking, what's the next role, you can kind of go, well, how does that stack up in terms of the next thing that I want to do in my career? And you can use it as a bit of a sense check. So for me, is have a plan.
I was trying to think of lots of different things that I was probably told, and there are things that I'd always advise people to do, like to just be, just to understand what a news desk needs and deliver on that. So like do a bit of thinking ahead of time. But actually, in terms of something that I was told, I think somebody just told me at one point just to work quickly. And I think that's probably stood me in good stead throughout everything that I've done, because it's always quick turnarounds and tight deadlines in a newsroom. And actually, if you're able to put the time into making sure that you can edit quickly and that you can write quickly and that you can quickly identify a clip that you might take out of an interview or the piece that you're going to run, it's those kind of things. If you can build up that skill set, then you suddenly become quite valuable to a newsroom, because there's a lot more things that you can do in a day, and that's, and the content needs to be generated at volume. So I think even though that sounds quite simple, that's probably one of the most valuable things somebody ever said to me.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Let's open it out to the floor.
Oh, Alex.
Hi. I wanted to ask, were there any students that you had on placement that really impressed you, and why was that the case?
I've had a few that still work for me now, came in on placement and work for me now, and it was all about attitude. That was the most overriding. Some of them still struggle with certain aspects of the job more than others, and others struggle with different other aspects compared to them, but it was all about, they all have, I would say, a similar attitude, which is willing to come in and work hard, willing to come in and ask the right questions and learn, and willing, as I've mentioned earlier, to kind of read the room and know when this isn't a good time to go and ask for some feedback on my package, because everyone is really busy working towards the show at 6 o'clock or whatever it might be. So it was about attitude, just coming in and just trying to settle in and fit into the group that are there, the team that are there, and just trying to make sure that you can be of use as well as it being of use to you. So it's a two-way street when you come in on placement, I would say.
Absolutely. All of that. Yes, we all remember the brilliant people, because they tend to still be working for us, right?
Yeah.
And then we also remember the people who weren't so good as well. It's that kind of thing. You can stand out in the right way and you can stand out in the wrong way. But that just demonstrates, doesn't it, that actually if you stand out in the right way, that it really is the route in. Jonny, you've still got people working for you. I'm sure you have Pav as well, and we have too. That are impressed on work placement. And it's for all the reasons that you said there. And
it means that when a job comes up, you're already in line, you're already there, you're already doing the job, and the best way to get a job that comes available is by already be doing it.
Yeah, agreed.
So I've got a question for Jonny specifically. Last week, the BBC announced that they were massively scaling back their local radio operation. As somebody, this is something I still am interested in going into. I'm now questioning, is this a worthwhile move?
Yeah, it's absolutely still a worthwhile move. I would say scaling back is one way of terming it. The inside BBC way would be to say that they are redistributing some of their money from linear radio services to online and digital services. So if you've got a skill set, as you all will have, coming out from university at the moment, of digital background, video editing, online writing, all those kinds of things, they are still local services. They are still local and are going to still be based in your local area, whether you're from Leeds or wherever it might be. Yes, there might be some shared programs in terms of maybe some evening programs, afternoon programs, which is what's currently on as a proposal, and this is just a proposal at the minute. It's not all being signed off and fully agreed, but I would say it is not a time to sit there and think local radio isn't the way for me to go, because local is absolutely still key to what the BBC is doing moving forwards. And that might not necessarily mean you're presenting a drive time programme in 5 years' time, but it might mean that you're still working on a sports team because live sport is still protected, or it might mean you're working as a journalist because they still need live local journalists, and they still will have a huge amount across the country, more so than any other organisation, I'd argue. So I would not at all think, because of the announcements last week and the proposals last week, that this is a time to give up on joining the BBC locally at all. And I'd also say that out of these situations comes opportunity. And you always have to look at that, particularly for those of you who have those skills, who might want to get into the BBC, their skills the BBC desperately wants and needs. So I would say for all of you, you can still certainly have a future working for the BBC locally, absolutely.
Oh, one at the back there.
Gardener's
Gardener's finished.
Being the kind of person who would ask that question to this panel is a really useful thing to do as well.
Yeah.
Right, I'll try and compete with the sound a little more. So first of all, thank you for today. Thank you for your time. Purely selfish question, really, but my circumstances are quite different probably from most people in the room in that I've worked in a different industry for the last 20 years and I've sort of taken a bit of a career change, so I'm a mature student. Is there anything that I need to do differently to stand out from everybody else? Is there anything that I kind of need to demonstrate differently that I can do?
I would say that that's a value that you bring, actually, and I would say that to anybody. We've got a lot of people who work for me who have come through a university route. We're actually reaching out for more people who come from different routes into the industry as well, but also people who have done courses such as this later on in their life and then come to us after that as well, have really added an extra dimension to what we do. So in terms of answering your question, should you do anything differently? No, I think everything that we've said already that you should be doing is the kind of thing that you should be doing, and then you've probably got that sort of added depth of other life experience that you might be able to draw on as well, which amplifies those things.
Yeah, totally agree.
Lots of nods from
Yeah.
everyone.
Yeah, lean on those skills that you've learned in your other industry. Transferable skills. It's not, they're not bad things, they're positive things.
Great. Any final questions?
I'm from the Caribbean, so a lot of my journalistic experience is working in the Caribbean, or at least a Western ideal of how news is supposed to look. So how would you advise that I kind of approach getting into the British mindset or the British news agenda?
That's for the newsman.
God, no idea. Will you keep the microphone? Would you keep the microphone? What's the news media? How would you say the news media is different in the Caribbean to how it is here?
Well, for one, the way that we kind of present our politics is a lot more neutral. There's not a right-leaning or left-leaning. It's very much straightforward about this is the facts, this is what they did. We don't attempt to paint our politicians in a particularly bad light. Specifically, I have a lot of experience working in the Bahamas, and we have two very warring political parties, but the way that the news media will present them isn't in a way that we clearly support one side. It's very neutral, unless you're, of course, talking about ZNS, which is a government-funded radio station. But I just wanted to know, since there is a lot of politics involved in the coverage of the media down here, and it tends to lean left or right, how do you advise that I would approach it?
Yeah, well, actually, from my own point of view, and as a representative of the broadcast media, I would say that will stand you in good stead, because I think in terms of the broadcast media in this country, it's got a long history of aiming for impartiality, and aiming for the impartiality that you're talking about there. It's completely on its head in the US, isn't it, in the sense that the broadcast media there will be a bit more like our newspaper journalism, which is partisan. So it stands you in good stead in this country, taking that kind of model and bringing it into what we're doing here. So lean on it, actually. There's a sort of grassroots attempts to try and sort of polarize some of the broadcast media as well, isn't there, in terms of, GB News or sort of really investigating that space in the market, and fair enough. But actually, really, if you're drawing on that experience that you've had already of how to develop politics and political discussion in the Caribbean, it sounds like it's really transferable.
And it sounds like you kind of understand it already, which is what I was saying earlier, sort of understand the industry. Understand where we're at in the industry, and as Jim says, broadcast-wise, BBC-wise, you might not all agree here, but the BBC does aim for impartiality down the middle. You can agree or disagree with that, that's fine, that's your opinions on it, but working with BBC colleagues day in, day out, week in, week out, hundreds of them at different stations I've worked at and the likes, people do genuinely aim for impartiality down the middle. They might not always get it 100% right, but they will always aim for it. So it kind of sounds like you already understand it, which I think is probably a big step in the right direction anyway.
Okay, is this on? Okay, thanks. As more local commercial radio stations are being hoovered up by corporates and being absorbed into a national network, Do you think that there's now less opportunity for people who live outside of London to get into the radio industry?
Should I take that one? I would. Do you know what? I mean, you're right with the first half of that, but actually, I mean, if there's commercial groups there's a number of them in England, right? And Bauer's one of the biggest, and Global's one of the others, and Global's London-based, and we're regional-based. So I'm the head of news and sport for England for Bauer Media, and I'm based here in Leeds. And actually one of our main broadcast centres is over in Manchester. So we, in the same way that the BBC has done over the years, are aiming to, and what Channel 4's done it now in Leeds, isn't it? You know, actually bringing journalism out into the regions rather than focusing it in on London is a main part of what we're doing. I sense you want to come back.
I was on about the Great City Radio Network because loads of local stations became that Great City Radio because they all started to get hoovered up, and I thought that was going to be a loss of identity, of local identity, because now the Great City Radio is just one local programme and the rest of it is networked.
I mean, we were talking about the BBC changes earlier, weren't we? It's a general movement in the UK for networking of programming, isn't it? Global did it before, we did it with Great Hits Radio, the BBC are now doing it with various shows. And rest assured, in terms of this audience in this room, Ofcom, the regulator, will genuinely and generally be asking that if the BBC is doing that, or if, because it's now regulated by Ofcom, and if we're doing that, or if Global are doing that, the payoff, the thing that the business then has to demonstrate is that they deliver enhanced local news as a result, okay? So if Simon Mayo is now on Mix 96 in Aylesbury, as a result of it not being Mix 96 anymore and it's GHR, the thing about that is that I've had to find a way to invest in the local news there so that we're doing our local news in more depth than it was being done before. So that's the reality of the situation there, and you can ask yourself whether the local news is being amplified is of value or not, and whether, I mean, we're certainly having lots more people listening to the radio stations now as a result, so I always think that that's of benefit in terms of my bit getting out to them, which is the local news in Aylesbury and in Bucks, Beds and Hearts.
Just to finish, I know we have talked about the downsides, that it can be difficult to get into this industry, but let's be honest, it's a great one. At the same time, everybody's here because they want to get into this industry. Just let's finish off by telling me the best bit about your job. Why do you still love working in this industry?
I was at Anfield last week watching Leeds beat Liverpool 2-1. Yeah. That's the best bit of my job. Hands down, the best bit of my job, arguably the best bit of my year. So that is why this industry is still great to get into. I can only talk from a sports perspective because that's what I do and that's what I'm passionate about. But if you go into this industry following something you're passionate about, be that news, be that advertising, marketing, whatever that is, if you follow it and you can get paid to do something you're passionate about, the old saying is you'll never work a day in your life. I'm not going to be as cheesy as that and say you'll never work a day in your life because I work. But you will certainly enjoy many more of your day's work than you would do if you're doing a job that you're having to do because you have to do it. So follow it, and if you can get there and you work hard enough and you have the right attitude, then you'll certainly enjoy many more days at work than you might do if you don't do all those other things.
Yeah, same. I'm 26 years in, and I love going to work every day. Yeah. I always have, you know, and there's travel, you see things, the creativity, it's a fabulous industry. It really, really is. And it can be whatever you want it to be, really. It can, you know, the opportunity's there.
I remember wanting every day to be different, to not have to wake up and think, I'm going to do the same things today that I did yesterday or the day before that. And my goodness, it still delivers that every day. You know, and then some. Every day is different. Every day is a challenge, and every day teaches you something. It's a fascinating business to be in.
Lovely way to end. Thank you so much for your time. We're so grateful. I'm expecting you all to rush up at the end, grab some email addresses, bang on some doors. Thank you guys. Massive round of applause for Jonny, Pav and Jim.